This single mom saves a young man who was in an accident in the rain, but discovers he was the son of a millionaire, and what he does when he finds her changes her life. Please rate my story from 0 to 10. Your opinion is very important, and subscribe to my channel to support my work. I'm counting on your help. The rain fell with fury that cold night, turning the streets into dark and treacherous rivers. The woman, her wet hair plastered to her face, ran as fast as her tired legs would allow, clutching the small child wrapped in a soaked blanket against her chest. Her worn-out shoes let in freezing water with every step, but she couldn't stop. She needed to get home before the little girl's fever got any worse. The wind howled between the abandoned buildings of that neighborhood, forgotten by City Hall, where the streetlights only worked when they felt like it. That night, the darkness was almost complete. The mother knew every pothole in those broken sidewalks, every dangerous corner, every dog that barked behind the rusty gates. She had lived there for 3 years, ever since the girl's father had abandoned them without leaving a dime. That's when she saw him, a figure lying in the gutter, half submerged in the dirty water flowing down the street. For a second she thought about moving on. It wasn't her problem. She had her sick daughter in her arms. She didn't have time for strangers, but something made her stop. Maybe it was the gleam of the expensive, torn clothing, so different from what you usually saw in that neighborhood. Or maybe it was simply her heart, which could never ignore the suffering of others, even when she could barely take care of herself. She approached carefully. It was a young man with features that looked like they came out of a magazine. Even covered in blood and mud, it was clear that he didn't belong there. Blood trickled from a deep cut on his forehead, mixing with the rainwater. He was breathing, but he seemed on the verge of unconsciousness. The woman looked around. The street was empty. No one had stopped to help. No one would. That's how it was in that neighborhood. Everyone looked out for themselves. She let out a sigh of frustration with herself, knowing that she was about to do something that would complicate her already impossible life even further. With effort, she carried her daughter to the awning of a closed store, leaving her protected there. The girl coughed softly, her eyes closed with fever. The mother whispered that she would be back in a minute. Just a minute. Then she returned to the stranger and, with strength she didn't know she had, began to drag him along the sidewalk. He was heavy, a dead weight that made her slip on the water. Her muscles screamed in pain. Her hands bled from scratches on the asphalt. But she didn't stop. She managed to bring him to the awning. She took out the only clean handkerchief she had, saved to wipe her daughter's face, and pressed it against his forehead. The stranger's eyes opened for an instant, glazed but conscious enough to see her. There was gratitude in that confused look. Then he fainted again. The woman stood there, trembling with cold, looking at that man and at her sick daughter. She knew she should call an ambulance, but she didn't have a cell phone. In fact, she never had. The hospital was miles away, and she didn't have money for a cab or for the bus. She only had a few coins in her pocket, enough to buy bread the next day. She made a decision that would change everything. Carrying her daughter with one arm and dragging the stranger with the other, she somehow made it to her room in the back of the laundromat. It was a tiny place, with moldy walls and a thin mattress on the floor. But it was her shelter. It had a roof. It had a faucet with cold water. It was all she could offer. She put her daughter on the mattress and the stranger on the floor next to her, on some old rags. She cleaned his wound with water and scraps of a t-shirt of hers. She had no alcohol, no gauze, no supplies, just her determination and her trembling hands. The night was long. The girl cried with fever. The stranger moaned in delirium. The mother didn't sleep a single minute, alternating between placing damp cloths on her daughter's forehead and checking if the man was still breathing. At dawn, when the first ray of sunlight entered through the dirty window, she realized the gravity of what she had done. She had brought a stranger into her house. She didn't know who he was, where he came from, what he did. He could be dangerous. He could bring trouble. But when she looked at him in the daylight, she saw only an injured human being, someone who needed help as much as she did. In the following days, she skipped her cleaning job. She knew that meant losing her job, but she had no choice. She couldn't leave her sick daughter alone, and that man needed constant care. She used the money she had saved for the girl's doctor's appointment, buying basic medicines at the drugstore, lying that they were for herself. The pharmacist didn't even look her in the eye, just wrapped the medicines and held out her hand to receive the payment. The daughter, even sick, watched everything with curiosity. She asked why that man slept so much, why he didn't wake up to play, if he didn't have a home like the other people on the street. The mother didn't know what to answer. She just stroked the child's hair and asked her to be quiet so as not to wake him. On the third day, he finally opened his eyes for longer. He looked around, confused, scared. He tried to get up but fell back, dizzy. The woman approached slowly, offering water in a cracked glass. He drank greedily. Then he looked at her with a lost expression and asked the question that would change everything. He didn't know her name. He didn't know where he was. He didn't know who he was. The mother felt her stomach clench. This was more serious than she had imagined. The man had lost his memory, and now she was responsible for a stranger without identity, without a past, without anything. The owner of the laundromat did not allow extra residents. If she found out, she would kick them out right away. She had no way to pay for another place. She had nowhere to go. But when she looked into his lost eyes, she decided she would find a way. She always had. She would call that man just the guy until he remembered who he was. She would allow him to stay until he recovered. Then each would go their own way. It was the right thing to do. It was the human thing to do. What she didn't know was that that decision would lead her down a path that would forever change the destiny of them all. The following weeks brought a strange routine to that cramped room. The guy, still weak and disoriented, insisted on helping as much as he could. He carried heavy buckets of water, hung wet clothes on the lines in the laundromat's backyard, swept the floor. His movements were slow, trembling, but there was a fierce determination in every gesture. The mother watched it with a mixture of gratitude and growing concern. The owner of the laundromat soon found out. A fat woman with a shrill voice, with eyes that seemed to calculate the value of every inch of space, appeared knocking on the door one grey morning. She crossed her thick arms over her chest and made it clear that harboring strangers violated the rental agreement. Either the mother would pay an additional monthly fee, or everyone would have to leave immediately. The woman felt the ground disappear under her feet. She could barely afford the current rent. How would she get extra money? But she agreed, because there was no choice. She accepted extra shifts, cleaning offices during the early morning, arriving home when the sun began to rise, her eyes burning with fatigue, her hands chapped from so much cleaning product. The guy, realizing the sacrifice she was making for him, felt an overwhelming weight of guilt. He decided to look for work, even with the constant dizziness and the hands that trembled uncontrollably. He went out in the morning, walked the streets, trying to offer himself for any service, but was rejected everywhere. His appearance was still too fragile, his eyes too lost. No one trusted him. It was during one of these walks that something strange happened. A luxurious black and gleaming car stopped beside him. 3 men in suits looked at him with disturbing attention. The guy felt a shiver run down his spine, as if his body recognized something that his mind had forgotten. The men exchanged glances, examining him from head to toe. But when they saw his simple and patched clothes, borrowed from a neighbor's mother, and his overgrown and disheveled beard, they drove on without saying a word. The guy stood on the sidewalk, trembling. He didn't understand why that scene had left him so disturbed. He went home in silence, without telling anyone anything. The mother began to notice strange things about him. When he had a high fever one night, he murmured phrases in another language, words that she didn't understand, but that sounded fluent and natural. Another time, she offered him a cheap soup of old vegetables and saw an expression of repulsion cross his face before he could hide it. He ate without complaining, but it was obvious that his body rejected that type of food, as if he wasn't used to it. Who was this man? The answer to that question would have to wait, because a greater tragedy was about to happen. The daughter, who had been gradually improving, had a sudden relapse. One hot afternoon, while the mother was working, the girl began to tremble violently, her lips turning purple, her breathing short and rapid. The guy, who was alone with her, felt panic take over every cell of his body. Without thinking, he carried the child in his arms and ran through the streets to the nearest clinic. His lungs burned, his legs weakened, but he didn't stop. He arrived panting, sweating, desperate. The receptionist barely looked at him, pointed to an endless line of sick people, and said to wait his turn. He waited, 6 hours sitting on that hard bench, with the girl burning with fever in his arms, seeing people being called one by one in a torturously slow manner. The child cried softly, asking for her mother, and he whispered words of comfort that he didn't even know where they came from. He promised that everything would be all right, that she was strong, that she was a warrior. When they were finally seen, the doctor examined the girl with a serious expression. It was a serious infection. She needed a specific antibiotic, and she needed it fast. He wrote the prescription and handed it to the guy, who looked at that paper as if it were a death sentence. He knew that that medicine would be expensive. He knew that the mother had no money. He left the clinic with the girl in his arms and made a decision. He started stopping people on the street, explaining the situation, asking for help. He was ignored by most. Some crossed the street to avoid him. Others laughed, thinking it was some kind of scam. One woman spat on the ground near him and called him a bum. Each rejection hurt more than the previous one. He had never felt that before, that humiliation that burned more than any physical wound. But he didn't give up. He kept asking, begging, his voice becoming hoarse from repeating the same story. That's when an elderly gentleman with grey hair, with thick hands stained with grease, stopped and really listened. The man was about 60 years old, deep lines on his face that told stories of a hard life. He owned a small auto repair shop nearby. He looked at the girl trembling in the guy's arms, looked at his desperate eyes, and took out some crumpled bills from his pocket. It was exactly the amount of the medicine. The guy cried, right there on the sidewalk, with the child in his arms. Tears streamed down his dirty face. He tried to thank him, but the words wouldn't come out. The gentleman just patted him on the shoulder and said that when he could, he should pay it forward by helping someone else. Then he handed him a scribbled card with the address of the auto shop, saying that if he needed work, he should show up there. When the mother came back from work that night and found out what had happened, she broke down. She cried with gratitude, cried with shame for not having been there, cried with guilt for having failed her daughter. The guy held her trembling hands and said that she hadn't failed. He said that she was the strongest person he knew, and at that moment something changed between them. An invisible bond made of shared suffering and mutual sacrifice. The next day, the guy went to the auto shop. The gentleman with grey hair greeted him with a tired smile and put him to work. The payment was small, but honest. The work was hard, but dignified. And for the first time since he had woken up without memory, the guy felt like he had a purpose. The months passed slowly. The girl recovered, returning to smile and play. The mother managed to keep the payments up to date with the help of his salary. The owner of the auto shop treated the guy with paternal patience, teaching him about engines and brakes, about repairs and tools. There was something comforting in that place, smelling of oil and metal. But the peace wouldn't last long. One ordinary day, while working under an old car, The guy hit his head on a metal part. The pain was sharp, and for a second, his vision went dark. When it returned, there was something new in his mind, a vague, blurry, but undeniable image. A large hall, with crystal chandeliers hanging from the ceiling, a grey-haired woman crying, a violent argument with an older man, harsh words being exchanged, a door being slammed. The guy was paralyzed under the car, his heart beating wildly. His memory was starting to come back, and he was afraid of what he would discover. The guy didn't tell anyone about the memory that had emerged. He kept that image of the luxurious hall as a dangerous secret, fearing what it might mean. Maybe he had a family looking for him. Maybe he had abandoned responsibilities. Or maybe he was someone who didn't deserve to be found. The uncertainty gnawed at him from within, but he was afraid to discover the truth. Meanwhile, life in the laundromat room continued to be precarious. The three had become a strange family, with shared routines and simple meals around a broken little table. The girl treated the guy like an older brother, jumping on his lap when he came back from the auto shop, showing drawings made with crayons borrowed from the neighbor. He smiled at her in a way he never imagined being capable of, feeling a deep tenderness for that fragile child he had almost lost. The mother worked tirelessly, her shifts multiplying, her hours of sleep decreasing. The guy saw the dark circles under her eyes, saw her hands increasingly hurt by the chemicals, saw the way she walked bent over from carrying so much weight. And he began to feel something more than gratitude, something that scared him and warmed him at the same time. But then came the blow that would change everything. The laundromat owner showed up one cold morning with an announcement that froze everyone's blood. She had sold the property. The new owners wanted to completely renovate the place. All the tenants had 15 days to vacate. The mother turned as white as a sheet. 15 days. How would she find another place in 15 days? She spent the next few days running around the city, visiting cheap places advertised in old newspapers found in the trash. But they all asked for a deposit in advance, a guarantor, proof of income. Things she didn't have, things she would never have. With each door slammed in her face, the reality became clearer and more terrifying. She and her daughter would be sleeping on the streets. There was no other way out. The woman began to have nightmares where she saw the girl cold, hungry, being taken away by social services because she couldn't take care of her. The guy noticed her growing despair. He saw when she stopped eating to save food for her daughter. He saw when she cried, hidden in the public restroom, thinking no one was listening. He saw when she started looking at the street with that empty look of someone who had lost all hope. He went to the gentleman at the auto shop and asked for an advance. The grey-haired man sighed deeply, his shoulders slumping in a way that revealed his own struggle. He explained that he was going through serious financial difficulties. A big client had stopped paying, suppliers were collecting old debts, and he could barely keep the shop open. There was no advance possible. There was barely a guaranteed salary for next month. The guy left there feeling the weight of the world on his shoulders. He walked aimlessly through the city, his feet leading him through streets he didn't know, or rather, that he thought he didn't know, because somehow his feet knew where to go. He ended up in a completely different neighborhood. Clean streets, well-kept trees, huge mansions hidden behind high walls. Everything there breathed wealth and power, and something in that place pulled at his memory like an invisible hook. He stopped in front of an imposing wrought-iron gate. He looked at that grand entrance and felt a sharp pain pierce his head. The memories came in violent waves, fragmented images that fit together like pieces of a macabre puzzle. He remembered being inside that mansion. He remembered heated arguments with an older man, a man with cold eyes and an authoritarian voice who controlled every aspect of his life. He remembered shouting that he didn't want that life, that he wouldn't accept any more orders, that he would prove that he could survive on his own. He remembered running out that stormy night on his expensive motorcycle, driving too fast on streets that were too wet. He remembered the accident. The guy fell to his knees right there on the sidewalk, his hands pressed against his head. Who was he? Where did he come from? And why had he fled that life of luxury to end up almost dead in a gutter? He got up trembling and ran back to the laundromat room. He didn't tell the mother anything. He couldn't, because now he was sure that he came from that world of wealth, and he feared that by revealing it, he would lose the only family that really mattered. But the problems wouldn't wait for him to resolve his internal conflicts. The next day, the gentleman at the auto shop suffered a serious health problem. A pain in his chest made him faint in the middle of his shift. He was rushed to the hospital. The doctors said he needed absolute rest for weeks, maybe months. The auto shop closed its doors. The guy lost his job just when he needed it most. Despair had a new form now, more solid and suffocating. He had 5 days before the eviction. He had no money. He had nowhere to go. And worse, he knew that the mother and daughter would suffer because of him, because if it weren't for his presence, maybe she could find a tiny room just for her and her daughter. That's when the mother made a drastic decision. She accepted an extra job for a private party. A temp agency offered triple pay for those who worked serving and cleaning at a party in a mansion in the upscale neighborhood. It was far away. The work would be hard and humiliating. But she had no choice. She would take her daughter with her because she had no one to leave her with. On the night of the party, the mother wore her least worn outfit and put a simple dress on the girl. She promised the child that if she stayed quietly in a corner, when they got home they would have money to buy something nice. The girl, realizing her mother's tension, agreed with seriousness beyond her few years. The mansion where the party would take place was even bigger and more luxurious than the mother had imagined. Crystal chandeliers hung from the soaring ceilings. Expensive paintings covered the walls. Elegant guests circulated with glasses of wine that probably cost more than her rent for an entire year. The mother worked tirelessly, collecting dirty plates, cleaning surfaces, being as invisible as all the employees there. The daughter sat in a discreet corner of the service corridor, looking at everything with wide eyes. She had never seen so much luxury. It seemed like a world from another planet. That's when the unexpected happened. The girl, bored and curious, got up and began to explore the mansion. She passed through elegant corridors, climbed a marble staircase, opened a glass door that led to a huge garden. And there, sitting alone on a stone bench, she found a grey-haired man in an impeccable suit. He was holding a photograph in his hands and crying silently. The girl, with the innocence typical of her age, approached without fear. She asked why he was sad at such a beautiful party. The man, startled, looked at the child, and something in his hardened face softened. There was a fragility in that girl that touched something deep within him. He offered her a piece of cake that was on a small table next to him and asked where her mother was. The girl explained in her simple language that her mother worked at the party, that they lived in a small place, that they would soon have to leave, that the guy who lived with them had lost his job and everyone was very worried. The man listened to every word with growing attention. There was something in that story that resonated with him in a strange way. When the mother finally found her daughter and saw where she was, she almost fainted in shock. She apologized profusely to the elegant man, explained quickly that the girl had run out of her sight, that it would never happen again. The man looked at the mother with an intensity that made her uncomfortable. He seemed to be analyzing every detail of her face, looking for something. Then, with a soft but firm voice, he said he wanted to talk to her about a job opportunity. 2 days later, the elegant man appeared at the laundromat. His luxurious car, parked on the dirty street, caused a stir among the neighbors. The mother, surprised and suspicious, received him with apprehension. He introduced himself as a businessman who lived alone on a large property and needed a housekeeper. He offered housing, a salary 3 times higher than she earned, and the possibility of bringing her daughter. The woman couldn't believe what she was hearing. It seemed too good to be true. Where was the catch? But despair spoke louder than distrust. She mentioned hesitant the guy who lived with them. The businessman paused for a long time when he heard about him. His eyes filled with a strange emotion, something between pain and hope. He agreed that the young man could also work as a driver and assistant. The move happened quickly. In 3 days, the three found themselves living in a small but comfortable house on the grounds of the mansion. It had real furniture, soft beds, a kitchen with a working stove. For the mother and daughter, it was like an impossible dream. For the guy, it was something completely different. The moment he stepped onto the property, the last barriers of his memory crumbled. He remembered everything. That was the house where he had grown up. The businessman was his father. All the discussions, all the conflicts, all his rebellious escape came back with painful clarity. His father had built a fortune investing in various businesses, accumulating enough capital to live comfortably for generations. But with wealth came absolute control, the demand for perfection, the constant pressure for him to take on responsibilities he didn't want. The guy looked at his father and realized something shocking. The older man was watching him with clear recognition in his eyes. He knew who his son was. The extreme weight loss, the overgrown beard, and the simple clothes hadn't been enough to fool him. But the father pretended not to recognize him. Why? The guy decided not to reveal that he had recovered his memory. He wanted to understand the game his father was playing. And more importantly, he was afraid of losing the mother and daughter. They were his real family now. He didn't want to go back to that life of empty luxury and suffocating obligations. The businessman, in turn, watched everything with a broken heart. He had recognized his son immediately, but had chosen to pretend as a way to test if he had really changed. He wanted to see if the young man who had fled selfishly and arrogantly would return, transformed. He had hired the mother not because he needed a housekeeper, but to be close to his son without him knowing. For weeks, this silent dance of lies continued. The father and son worked side by side, talking about trivial matters, each pretending not to know who the other really was. The mother worked diligently in the mansion, without imagining the family drama that was unfolding around her, and the daughter, innocent of everything, flourished in that new environment, enchanted with the huge garden and the books that the businessman gave her as gifts. The guy watched the father interact with the girl and felt a strange pain in his chest. The man treated that child with a paternal affection that he had never shown his own son. He laughed at her simple jokes, listened to her childish stories with genuine attention, played with her in the garden on Sundays. It was like seeing an alternate version of the father he had never known. A month later, the businessman announced a business trip. He would leave for a few weeks and leave the guy responsible for taking care of the property and protecting the mother and daughter. Before leaving, he looked deeply into his son's eyes and said something that would keep echoing. Trust yourself to make the right choices. During the father's absence, the guy and the mother grew even closer. They worked together in the garden, cooked together at night, talked about dreams and fears after the girl fell asleep. One night, under a starry sky, they finally confessed what they felt for each other. But the woman was afraid that when his memory came back completely, he would abandon her. Afraid of not being enough for someone who clearly came from a better world. The guy, carrying the weight of his lie, promised that he would never leave her. But the words sounded empty even to his own ears, because he wasn't telling the truth. The businessman returned, bringing a young and extremely beautiful woman. He introduced her as a niece, recently arrived to help with the family business. The woman was everything the mother wasn't: elegant, refined, educated. She began to talk to the guy about art, music, international travel. She praised his appearance, said that he looked like a heartthrob, suggested that he deserved more than a simple life. The mother saw everything and felt her heart breaking slowly. She distanced herself emotionally from the guy to protect herself from the inevitable pain. He, confused and hurt by her distance, became vulnerable to the advances of the supposed niece. The beautiful woman invited him to expensive dinners, outings to exclusive places, conversations about the world of luxury he had left behind. For a moment, the guy almost gave in. He almost forgot everything he had lived through in recent months. But then, one ordinary morning, the mother's daughter ran to him with a drawing she had made. It was a portrait of their family of 3, with colorful hearts around it. She said she had drawn it because he was the coolest dad in the world. That hit him like a punch. He realized what he was about to throw away. He confronted the beautiful woman and said he wasn't interested. She, surprised by his loyalty, revealed the truth. She was an actress hired by the businessman to test him. The father wanted to know if the son would choose the ease of luxury or the true love he had found in simplicity. Enraged, the guy decided to confront his father. But before he could, the mother got sick. The overwork, the emotional stress, and the pain of thinking she would lose the man she loved took their toll. She fainted in the mansion's kitchen and was bedridden with a high fever and extreme exhaustion. The guy didn't leave her side. He took care of her as she had taken care of him that first rainy night. He made cold compresses, prepared soups, held her hand when she cried in her sleep. The girl sat in the corner of the room, watching everything with silent tears streaming down her face. The businessman watched that scene from afar and finally understood. His son was no longer the selfish young man who had fled home. He had transformed into a real man, capable of loving and sacrificing himself for others. That mother and that child had done what he had never been able to do. They had taught the guy the true meaning of family. When the mother recovered, the businessman gathered everyone in the room. With a choked voice, he revealed that he had always known the guy's true identity. He asked for forgiveness for having tested him in such a cruel way. He explained that his fear of losing his son again had made him act that way. The son, with tears in his eyes, asked for forgiveness for having been proud and run away. He said that he had needed to lose everything to understand what really mattered. The mother, shocked by the revelations, felt betrayed. She got up to leave with her daughter. She couldn't take any more lies, but the guy stopped her, kneeling before her. He explained that he was afraid of losing her by revealing who he really was. He said that in the months lived as an ordinary man, he had found what he had always been looking for, true love and real purpose. The businessman, with a broken voice, offered his blessing to the couple. He said that he didn't see the mother as an employee, but as his son's savior and the woman who deserved to be part of the family. He then revealed something that would change everything once again. He had a serious heart condition. The doctors said he didn't have much time. His greatest fear was to leave without reconciling with his son. That revelation united everyone definitively. In the following months, father and son rebuilt their relationship with honesty and respect. The guy gradually took over the family business, not out of obligation, but because he wanted to honor his father's legacy. The mother, still processing everything, agreed to stay and helped create a social project aimed at women in vulnerable situations, using family resources to transform lives like hers had been transformed. A year after that stormy night, in a simple ceremony in the mansion's garden, the guy and the mother got married. The businessman walked her to the small altar set up among the flowers, and the girl scattered petals along the way with a radiant smile. As they exchanged vows, the businessman looked at that scene and felt a peace he had never experienced. His son had found not only love, but also himself. The mother had found not only security, but also dignity and respect. And the girl had gained not only a father, but a complete family. Months later, with the businessman playing with his granddaughter in the garden while the couple watched from the porch, everyone understood the same truth. True wealth was never in the bank accounts, the investments, or the accumulated assets. It was in that rainy moment when a woman reached out her hand to a fallen stranger, and in that moment of humility when a lost man accepted that hand. The rest was just a consequence of that simple choice to see humanity in each other, even when everything seemed lost. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe to my channel. I promise to bring you videos every day that will make your life happier. Comment on what you thought of my story, giving it a rating from 0 to 10. And thank you very much.